It's Monday, February 12th, 2024, Manic Monday, Super Bowl Recovery Monday. Everybody feeling kind of groggy. Should be a national holiday. Coming to you live on Fans First Sports Network, Andy P. Big G, the Level Up College Football Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. What's cracking, lacking, Andy? We back in the building, bro. What's going on?
I'm excited. I'm glad we're getting back into our routine. And of course, like we've been saying, just because it's the off season doesn't mean that there's not something to talk about. And, you know, last week we jumped on for a quick show. We talked about some of the news. And then in the meantime, since then, one of the new Big Ten teams hired a head coach. And it's a weird one.
Yeah. There's never a dull moment in college football, bro. Never a dull moment. So look, we got the hire. We got a UCLA hire. But wait a minute. Before we even get to UCLA hire, make sure you like, subscribe, and share the podcast with everybody out there. We're going live to build the audience, to build it up. We got some faithful folks already over in the chat. Pay Afton, Tim Lyons. What's cracking, lacking, you guys? Hoping to see more and more people join us on the Level Up podcast, Fans First. So share it on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you got. But Andy, we got a UCLA hiring, man. Deshaun Foster. Deshaun, like we were talking backstage. I was like, who? And I remembered he used to play for UCLA way back in the day. But Andy, give us a little breakdown about this coaching hire and why it might be cooked out there in UCLA this week.
Yeah, UCLA obviously losing Chip Kelly means that, you know, they've got players who can now enter the portal for the next 25-ish days, which is not obviously great if you're Deshaun Foster here, which is probably why they ended up making the hire that they did, because Foster, he was a member of Chip Kelly's staff. He was already a part of this UCLA team that had obviously recruited in who they've got. But it's an interesting hire. He's a former UCLA player, which obviously is a trend we've seen more and more. He's also it's really interesting. He was the Las Vegas Raiders running back coach for all of 2 weeks until he got this job. So he clearly is a quote unquote rising star here, but he's going to be taking over the helm of a program that not that UCLA is in trouble, but I think that if you were rating the schools going into the Big Ten right now, Oregon is probably the safest and probably the most likely to continue to be successful. Washington, number 2, again, they're coming off of a national title game. They've proven that they can at least hit the portal. They can pay the money to compete with the big guys. Number 3 is USC because, you know, they're still USC, but they're a bit of a mess right now. And then UCLA, when you are the 4th team going into conference realignment of those 4 going to that Big Ten, it's tough. And I think UCLA is just kind of admitting that, look, we're going to cash those Big Ten checks. We're going to take our time, and we're going to have to rebuild this in a more sustainable way than what we were doing with Chip Kelly before.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you with them circling the wagons for the hire. It's sort of like I'm not comparing Michigan to UCLA, but it's almost like what Michigan did with, you know, hiring the offensive coordinator to try to get guys because of the whole deal with the portal. Because the deal is, if you're a top 25 or top 30 team from last season, and you have juniors and sophomores that actually served a purpose and was maybe all conference and all whatever else, what I am telling you, college football programs are hovering over these guys like it's a casket and like we're reading you your last rites. And, oh, by the way, we have a spot and a scholarship available for you to come to this school. Like, if I'm the Buckeyes, when I found out about it today, I'd have been like, look, as soon as Chip Kelly got the OC job at Ohio State, I would have raided the cover board. Like, dog, you got to give up everything you got that's decent to come over here and play with us, because that's how it works. We're in a new era, Andy, and you know this. The rich are getting richer. So I like it. I think UCLA can help themselves, but long term, I mean, no, not long term, short term, this ain't gonna help at all. Your thoughts, bro?
No, and I mean, I think that's the reality of the situation here. Is if you're UCLA, you're making a very conscious decision here to say, look, we understand that this next year in the Big Ten, it's going to be tough. We're all kind of adapting. We're all learning.
Yeah.
Let's take a beat. Let's see how things go. Let's try to bring in somebody that's going to keep things the same from a culture standpoint. But I'm with you. I think that if you're UCLA, like this past year with UCLA, where you and me were talking about UCLA every week because they were sitting around that fringe top 25, do
Yeah.
not think that that's going to be happening this year.
Oh, yeah, they're cooked. I mean, there ain't no
Yeah.
ifs, ands, this about it. I was looking at their schedule, Andy, just now while we were talking, and I was like, man, 5 wins, maybe 6 wins, maybe 6, trying to get bowl eligible, but they're cooked. They've already been rated somewhat because, like, Dante Moore left and went to, University of Oregon, which I have no clue why he did it, but he went, he's going. They already got 2 quarterbacks. But with that schedule coming back and with the guys that they possibly could lose now, they're looking Nebraska and Northwestern and some of those other Purdue's coming into the Big Ten in the face, man. That's where they're going to sit coming in. But they might show up in another sport, maybe basketball. Who knows? But in the Big Ten, football's king. So UCLA, gonna be hard to go. Hard road to go when you first start out for sure. Andy, next topic, bro. Next topic. Listen, man, it's a way too early. Way too early. Top 25 predictions based on all this shenanigans that went in, the NIL, the transfer portal. I mean, teams have not only stockpiled, but rebuilt their rosters in position to where they literally have to make an NFL run. We could have a national champion that actually plays 17 games next year. We could actually have that. 16 at minimum, but 17 games moving forward. So early going on, who you got? Who you like? Maybe in your top 5 or 10, man.
Yeah, I think when you take a look at which teams made off the best this offseason, there's two schools at the top, and that is Georgia and Ohio State. Both of those schools put together fantastic recruiting classes. Both of those schools put together fantastic transfer portals. Both of them rated Alabama after the Saban move. Both of them were able to go out and get multiple 5-star freshmen who are expected to compete for starting slots. They got multiple 5-star transfers who are expected to slot into the key roles. I think that those are the 2 schools that you look at and you say, you know what? They are clearly the dominant powers. And then when you look around the rest of college football, Georgia, now that we know Bama is going to probably be taking a step back, the other SEC school that they got to look out for is you got to look out for Texas, who's now in the SEC, and you got to look out for Oregon in the Big Ten. Those are 2 schools that were obviously right on the cusp of competing for national titles, for competing in the playoff, but they weren't quite there. Both, again, did a fantastic job of reloading and doing what they needed to do. From there, I think some of the schools that I'd be interested, we'll probably talk about them a little bit more here. But I think that you look at, Florida State, you see what Penn State's going to do. You talk about Ole Miss, you talk about Alabama, you talk about Michigan. One of the schools that I think is really interesting is in the Big 12. Kansas has really quietly put together a really solid team. I would normally put Kansas State here, but because they lost Will Howard to Ohio State, I'm not sure that they have a quarterback who's ready to kind of drive the bus. Kansas, meanwhile, showed last year, didn't matter who they played at quarterback, that team was going to be a tough out. Big 12 is taking a step back this year in terms of overall talent. I think that they could run the table in the Big 12 and then end up as the Big 12 entrant in the playoff, which means that they'll probably be a default top 5 school. And then there's Clemson as well. Dabo's on the hot seat here. It's clear that he has to perform this year. And again, ACC is a little bit down this year. They're going into a new scheduling format where they don't necessarily have to play the same gauntlet they've played in the past. So those are all schools that I'm keeping an eye on right now. But I do think that unlike this year where there were like 4 or 5 schools that you were like, oh man, they're the elite of the elite. Right now, I'm looking at Ohio State and Georgia as the 2 elite schools that everybody else is chasing in some way, with Texas and Oregon just a step below those 2.
Yeah, if I had to go top 5 today, honest to God, I would go Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Texas 3, Oregon 4, And believe it or not, you know why I was slotted at slot 5? And this is a hard truth, but I just think it really is. I think Penn State would be 5. If I had to go today, before spring and all whatever else, I would go those 5. And then maybe like Ole Miss, Missouri at 6, 7. Maybe like the next tier down, Bama maybe 8, Michigan 9. And then it becomes a cluster. But the issue is, like you said, all of this is good for a preseason top 25, but you got to put it together. I know here in Columbus, Ohio, here in Ohio, the deal is we got 2 positions of concern: right tackle and which guy's going to start quarterback. I think Will Howard, with the transfer, I think that he knew that he's going to get the nod, but there's 2 freshmen there, man, that's going to push this guy, man. Air Nolan and the kid that transferred out of Bama, oh my God, they're going to push him for that spot. But now I think it would have been a big thing if Bill O'Brien would have been there as the OC. But now that Chip Kelly's there, hey man, you're going to have to be able to throw that pill. If you can't throw that pill, you ain't starting a quarterback for Ohio State. So there's the door opening for everybody on the roster that plays quarterback. So I think and the reason I'm saying that about Ohio State, because I think Ohio State and Georgia and maybe Texas in that conversation has the less questions as far as the whole roster is concerned. So that's why I'm saying, Andy, I think that early on, way too top 25 is a good thing because you got to see who you're chasing. Now, I see Tim over there in the chat, fam. Tim talking about, man, ain't nobody scared of the Big Ten. It's a soft conference. Nah, not heck no. And Notre Dame is winning the chip. Tim, Notre Dame needs to get in a conference quick, fast, in a hurry. If they don't get in a conference, they are cooked because the way that things are going and how they're building up, they're building this whole SEC Big Ten thing. If you don't get in, you're not going to be able to recruit against them. So now, guess what? Those players that you thought traditionally were they're going to go to Notre Dame, they're not going to do that. Because why would I? Because I'm not even going to be playing any of the top tier teams. Because it's either going to be SEC, Big Ten. And Andy, I think that's where the whole top 10 ranking, I think when the rankings first come out, I think every team in the top 10 minus Florida State is going to be from the Big Ten or the SEC. Your thoughts about that, Andy?
Yeah, I think that it's really clear that the Big Ten and the SEC are just consolidating not just power, but resources and brand recognition. Like when you look at which games are going to be on national TV, like all credit to the Big Ten, their partnership with Fox on reclaiming that noon time slot that used to be for, if we're playing at noon, then we're the worst game. Big Ten kind of stepped up and said, look, we'll play the big noon games. We'll be all the time on noon, and we'll be the number only thing in that time slot.
Yeah.
And then they now they have NBC for the primetime game. SEC is obviously tied in with ESPN and CBS. It just is really obvious that those are the 2 conferences that are going to dominate the most airspace, but also have the most resources in order to do the most things. And so that's what I think that's where it gets interesting when we're talking about top 25 is when you look at which schools are going to be the most interesting in terms of, well, we look at their rosters and we look at their talent, but the only reason that we're not talking about them more is because they play in one of these tough conferences.
Yeah.
It's because you look at an Ole Miss and I look at who they added in on their roster. Like they brought in the number 1 transfer in Walter Nolan, who's an absolute disruptor on the defensive line.
Total facts.
If Ole Miss was in the ACC, I'd be saying that Ole Miss would be going undefeated in the ACC, and they'd be the conference favorites. Yeah. But because they're in the SEC, how many losses do they stack? How do they fare in that meat grinder of a schedule? Same thing with Penn State. Like I think that Penn State team, insanely talented. They were too young last year. They need to take a step forward this year. Yeah. Missouri is retaining an incredibly talented offense and is returning their quarterback. So they probably should be up there, and they show that they're good. It's one of these situations where I think you have to – it's really Notre Dame and then maybe Arizona if you don't believe that the Jed Fish loss is going to disrupt them before you can talk about a top 10 before you can talk about a playoff contending team that is potentially looking like on paper, like they could hang with any of these schools that we've already talked about as part of the Big Ten of the SEC. And that's just the reality of the situation right now.
Hey, so Andy, before we get off this topic, I got a question, man, because we spent a lot of time about this particular team last year. Can the Colorado Buffaloes sneak into the top 10, man, or in a way too early top 25? Can they sneak in, man? Because listen, Prime doesn't retool down there, man. And I think he's got some trenches jumping off with the offensive and defensive line. And all the skills back, including Shedeur Sanders, who, in my opinion, might be the front runner for this year's Heisman Trophy. So can Deion sneak in at like 12, 13, something like that, and get in there, man?
I mean, the best thing about the Colorado team this year is that we will find out opening week if they are going to be for real, because Colorado is hosting the North Dakota State Bison, who are a perennial do not schedule this team unless you have your things in line. They're obviously not a D1 team. They're in the football subdivision, 1AA used to be called. They are usually the best team in that league. I don't believe they won the championship this year, but they have a long history of upsetting teams that are just not gelled early in week one. And so I think for Coach Prime and for Colorado, if they come out, like, they are going to be the more talented team. But like you said, can that offensive line that is primarily portaled come together well enough to take on to win that game? If the answer is yes, much like last year, they've got like a nice slow load of the schedule before they have to play Kansas State all the way in the middle of October. And like, just looking at their schedule, like, the tough part is that, they have Kansas State, they have Arizona, they have Utah, and they have to go on the road to Kansas. Those were all teams that were ranked, but like, again, I don't know if Arizona is going to be able to take a step forward this year with the coaching change. I don't know what's going to happen with Utah and all the disruption that they had with their quarterback situation last year. And we saw that offense is just leaves a lot to be desired. So again, I'm with you. I think Colorado has the roadmap. Problem is, like, we'll know week one whether this is for real or not. And I hope it's for real, because I do think that we saw last year a good Colorado is good for the sport. More people will tune into college football if Colorado is good. But I think this year we'll know a lot sooner if Colorado is actually good.
Yeah. I think, and based on the scheduling too, man, and what we're looking at, this year you're going to know faster than ever who's for real and who's not, because of all these cross rivalries. We got huge games like we already talked about on last week's show, but you're going to know quick, fast, in a hurry, even with some of those subtle games. So like the Nebraska, Colorado, you're going to know real fast. You're going to know North Dakota State, Colorado. You're going to know. Same difference even like in the Big Ten. You're going to know week 2 what's the deal between Texas and Michigan. You're going to know right off the bat. You're going to know what Notre Dame, Florida State. You're going to know what's going on quick, fast, in a hurry based on that early schedule, man. So I think that we'll see more than ever a shakeup with the top 25, like week after week after week. And really, it doesn't really matter, because we know that when it's all said and done, the committee votes is what counts. And if the committee ain't locking in on you to say, hey, look, but see, then, Andy, that's the whole question too. Strength of schedule, top 25, man, it's going to be a lot of chatter going on out there, because if you ain't played nobody, they ain't going to rank you. Agreed?
Absolutely agree with you there. I think the biggest question that we're going to have, and we touched on this a little bit last week, but I think it's going to continue moving forward. The undefeated teams will be at the top, and then the one-loss teams will be right below them. The committee has been very clear, like we saw with Texas and Alabama, who you beat matters, and they will take into consideration those head-to-head matchups first and foremost.
Yeah.
Once you start getting into those 2 and 3 loss areas, that's where things get gray. And I want to know how a 2-loss or a 3-loss SEC school matches up with a 1-loss ACC school.
Yeah.
I think that I'm taking a look at their schedule right now. Virginia Tech, number 1 in terms of returning production on the
Yeah.
roster. They have a very soft schedule in the ACC this year. They're a team that probably isn't good enough to go undefeated. They do it because they have Clemson on the schedule. So does a 1-loss Virginia Tech that doesn't really play anybody else of note, but loses to Clemson in Death Valley, do they get ranked above a 2-loss SEC team that has played multiple teams in the top, let's say 10?
Yeah.
I think the reality is that the numbers and the metrics will say that the 2-loss team is better than a 1-loss team. But what everybody else is going to see is that, it's SEC bias or it's Big Ten bias here. And I think that that's going to be part of the challenge moving forward with these discussions, is because the SEC and the Big Ten are just going to have so much higher strength of schedule ratings moving forward that you're going to have to adjust your non-conference scheduling if you think you are going to be competing for a playoff spot.
Total facts. All right, so listen, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We got a couple more subjects we're going to get to. We got to pay some bills, hook up with our partners. If you guys are watching us live on YouTube, just give us like a 10-second pause. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and or Spotify, we'll be right back after we pay some bills with the Fans First Sports Network Level Up College Football Playoff with Andy P and Big G. Give us like 10 and we'll be right back. And we're back after a quick commercial break on Fans First Sports Network. Andy P. Big G, Level Up College Football Podcast. Hey, I got a question I want to answer over there from Tate Boy Fresh, man. Tate Boy Fresh said, is Ohio State for real, Big G? Absolutely, they're for real. And I'm not saying that because I'm biased. The real deal is, and this is something with our next topic that we're going to talk about. Me and Andy have been back and forth about position U, like who's the best, who's got what, who's rocking out, and who's really got the best positions. And traditionally, it's not like when you start talking about the NFL with the 53-man roster. The issue is you got to win the position battles in when it comes to, okay, who's got the best wide receiver core? Who's got the best running back room? Who's got the best O-line? So we started talking about post-position portal rankings. And Andy, I got some interesting takes, but I want to hear from you first concerning like who you got. Let's just do this. How about we do it this way? Andy, you go offense, and I'll go defense. Right? so that way people won't think I'm so biased. So I just want to hear your top 1 or 2: quarterback, wide receiver room, running back room, offensive line, tight end. So there's 4 spots. Who's your top 1 or 2 in each one of those position rooms as far as early predictions going into the spring?
Yeah, I think that for me, and again, we're going to be talking about a lot of the same schools here because I think some teams have done a really nice job of really building up tough rosters here.
Yeah.
It's absolutely wild for me to say, but I when you look at the quarterbacks across the country, we've seen more quarterback movement this year than ever before.
Facts.
And before the transfer portal opened, I would have said that Georgia had the best quarterback room in the country. I think that Stetson Bennett is not Stetson Bennett. Geez,
Beck.
Yes, Carson Beck. Carson Beck is somebody who last year I thought, we were talking about on the show, should have been getting a little bit more Heisman love with how well he played down the stretch.
Yeah.
Obviously, Jaden Daniels also played fantastic down the stretch.
Facts.
They lose out on Dylan Raiola, and it is a tough situation there for Georgia. But I still think that Carson Beck might be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC, and that room is still deep without Raiola, which is the absolute crazy part. The other thing that I will say, I think that Texas is about to get real interesting here, man.
That's facts. Yeah.
Quinn Ewers is going to be my way too early. Like last year, I was really early on the Michael Penix Heisman train. I'm jumping on the Quinn Ewers Heisman train here right now. If he last year we saw he took some pretty significant steps forward in his game. You still got Arch Manning back there, the backup quarterback uh, at Texas, transferred out because of that Arch Manning Quinn Ewers situation there.
Uh-huh.
And then the last one I'll give you, man, Oregon just really
Yeah,
quietly stockpiling some quarterbacks here.
that's facts. That's facts.
They're about to have 5-star on 5-star transfer competition for that starting quarterback spot, and that is not something I thought I'd say.
Yeah.
So the quarterback, most important position on the field usually, and we just talked about 3 schools that are both in our top 4 being at the top of those rankings, and that's for a reason. So before we jump into the the running backs, the wide receivers, and all those other positions, curious for your thoughts on the defensive side of the ball. What's the most important position and group, and who's the best stocked up at that position group?
To me, the most important defensive unit is the defensive line. The defensive line, you have to be able to. Now, the DBs and the D line work in conjunction, but normally, if your defensive line can put pressure on the quarterback, that makes your DBs look a whole lot better. So, and like people gonna say I'm biased, but bro, there's nobody in the country who's got a better returning defensive line unit than The Ohio State University. Jack Sawyer, JTT, Tyleek Williams, Hamilton, Malone, the transfer from Ole Miss, Hero Canoe, Caden Curry, Rashad Jackson, and the kid Eddie Houston. They're 9 deep. And they're going to transfer, man, with the transfers coming in. I mean, they got legitimately 2 to possibly 3 first-round draft picks between Jack Sawyer, JTT, and freaking Tyleek Williams. So they're number 1. There ain't no ifs, ands, buts about it. Number 2, University of Texas. Even though they lost a bunch of dudes, like they got legitimate dogs on that defensive line. Ain't no ifs, ands, buts about it. And my number 3 is Michigan, man. Chris Jenkins and them is still all there, bro. They lost a couple of dudes to the league, but they got some hogs on that defensive line. So as much as, I love Ohio State, I recognize game. So defensive line-wise, that's my 1, 2, 3, bro, in the country. So we're going to swing back to you, Andy. We're going to go back to the running back position. Running back, who you got 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3 in the country as far as depth and running back you?
Yeah, the running back is one of these weird positions in college now where we have seen bell cows really kind of take over at some schools, and then other schools decide to go for the committee approach, which I think makes a ton of sense. Like, depending on the school and the system that you're running, you probably want to have different running backs in for different situations. Yeah. So that's what really makes this an interesting kind of interesting question for me. Like, an example of this last year, I think Oregon running back by committee. Meanwhile, Oregon State, one guy who carried the load for the entire team.
Facts, total facts.
So it's tough, and so it's tough for me to say this, but I do think that the best mix of that group right now is Georgia, because they have a ton of athletes in that room, guys that can be either a slot receiver or running back, depending how you want to put it. But they might have gotten the most impactful offensive transfer. I know that there are better wide receivers, there are better quarterbacks that are moving, but Trevor Etienne, man, we know what his brothers can do.
Oh my God!
The fact that Florida couldn't hold on to him and that he is now at Georgia makes me very concerned that Georgia is now going to have an incredibly balanced offense. And that was something that we gave them criticisms for last year, was that offense was not very balanced. It was way too reliant on the tight end passing game. And we saw in the SEC title game, they were not able to effectively move the ball on the ground consistently. Alabama just essentially said, we'll go with lighter boxes and we can still stuff your run. And they did. Adding an ETN to that room, I think, will go a long way. Now, the offensive line is going to need to, take a step up for Georgia there.
Yeah, facts. That's total facts.
but I think the running backs at Georgia are worth talking about, if only because, man, ETN's going to run wild on that group.
Yeah. So if you had to, who would you put it to? I'm just out of curiosity. Who would you put it to?
I think the answer is Texas. Like, they lose Jonathan Brooks, and that is a huge loss. And yet we saw towards the end of last year, Texas is I'm calling anybody running back you is hard, but man, Texas under Sark has found something with the running back rooms, man. Like, they get 4 and 5 stars in there, and that it's going to be, give it 18 months in that weight room, and then all of a sudden they're churning out stars. And so I think Texas is another one where we have seen it consistently. They don't need to go out in the portal and get one, but they did it anyway, and they added Jarek Gibson to that room. And now you've got 2 guys that you could just hand the ball off to 100 times if you want to. But they won't, because they have Quinn Ewers. And it's, again, we're talking about these top 4 schools that you and I already kind of mentioned. This is what we're talking about with the consolidation of talent in the Big Ten and the SEC.
Yeah, I agree. If I would have ranked them 1, 2, 3, I would have went Georgia 1, Texas 2, Ohio State 3, and probably Notre Dame 4. So I agree with totality. Yeah. So I want you to listen. Before I go linebacker and DB, this is the most interesting one that I want to hear from you. I want to hear wide receiver, tight end position. Who's the best in the country coming next year? Who's the best? Because I know who it is, but I want to see what you say, Andy.
Look, I'm rolling with Tim here. I'm gonna poke the bear. Well, it's not really poking the bear. It's more setting up the bear for a slam dunk, man. Before the portal opened, would have said Missouri. Missouri did a fantastic job of keeping that wide receiver group together. We saw it in the bowl game. I think Missouri, before the portal opened, had the best wide receiver room in the country, and I still think that they'll be one of the top 3 units in the country this year. However, after the portal opened, and now that the portal's closed, that Buckeyes receiving room lost Marvin Harrison Jr. and somehow got deeper. And they're going to be able to run. They're going to be able to run trip sets this year, and I don't think people realize how dangerous that's going to be.
Man, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear about Emeka Buka, Jalen Smith, Brandon Enos, Carnell Tate. They ain't trying to hear all of that, man. They're not Jalen Ballard. They're not trying to hear that. But man, it's the truth. It's the truth, man. Now I will give Texas some credit though. With Isaiah Bond and all those guys transferring over to the University of Texas, yeah, they nice. But the sneaky one, man, is Arizona. Arizona was nice last year, man. And listen, all of them boys came back. Even though the coach and all that other stuff that happened, the whole squad back. And they got a quarterback that could chuck that bad baby all over the yard. So I look for Arizona to be up there and cause some problems as far as WRU. But yeah, Tim don't want to hear it. Other people don't want to hear it. But, WRU belongs to the Buckeye boys. All right, man. So look, I'm gonna go linebacker you, man. I'm gonna go linebacker. And I had to look, like pay attention, who's returning, who's got the most returning starters, which guys are, this, that, and this, who's projected first or second round draft picks. I'm going right off the back, Ole Miss University. I think Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi's linebacker core for next year is going to be dangerous, man. They're going to be dangerous because those kids, they got guys that can run like deers. And the way that their offense is set up, defense is set up next year from a strategic standpoint, I'm hearing rumblings they're going to switch from a 3-4 to a 4-3, which could even make their linebackers better because now what happens is those rush ends that you have, which are blitzers from the outside, now you stand them up in a 4-3, and then you bring another guy who's a downhill middle guy to smash the middle. So I'm like, man, Ole Miss has been known to have great guys. Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, but I like their returning unit. I think this year coming up. If I had to list the number 2, University of Texas, man. You're going to hear us talking about the same teams over and over and over again, man. The University of Texas is loaded. as much as I hate to say it, because I got a podcast partner that I share space with that's if you think I'm biased when it comes to Ohio State, he is biased beyond when it comes to the University of Texas. But the truth is in the pudding, man. They are the real deal, you know. And my last squad, University of Georgia. We got spoiled from the University of Georgia from a couple of years ago. We knew all the names like N'Kobe Dean and all those other guys. We knew who was there. Last year's team was a bunch of babies, and they proved that they can handle their business. So now you look at they were starting freshmen and sophomores. Now these guys are being sophomores and juniors. That makes all the difference in the world. Georgia's defense is unbelievable. So I like those three schools from a linebacker. You know, and for all those in the chat, I did not say one thing about Ohio State, even though I know that they got good linebackers. They are not listed in my top three for linebacker you. All right. So, Andy, offensive line. Who you got, bro?
I'm going to look at Oregon. Dan Lanning brought an SEC attitude to a school that previously did not really have SEC types of offensive line, and what he has done on that offensive line has been absolutely fantastic. Now, it's crazy that I'm saying that this is, you know, a top unit when they're losing their starting center, Jackson Powers Johnson, who is going to the NFL draft. Like that's a tough loss to have. However, they brought in two of the best transfer additions on the offensive line in Matthew Bedford and Traquan McRoy.
Facts.
And they also brought in a ton of offensive line talent through recruiting as well. And I just think that that's a situation where when you look at the way that Oregon wants to play, when you look at the track record there, the offensive line is all about cohesion. We saw that this year with Michigan. You've got to have guys that have played together before. There's got to be a program mentality. There's got to be a way of thinking and doing things there. And I think that Oregon is by far and away going to be the team that nobody really wants to play, not because of how good they are, but because that offensive line is going to beat you up as the game goes on. And I think that's going to be, I think that's the real interesting thing that I have when we talk about Michigan. Like, I want to say that Michigan is going to have a decent offensive line, but they just lost too many pieces, even though the recruits look fantastic and we know how good that program is. Same thing with Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss absolutely did a great job of rebuilding that offensive line, but they're relying a lot on the portal, and we haven't seen yet that a portal-built offensive line can gel in that first year. So I do think that right now there's a lot of teams that are interesting along the offensive line, but relied on the portal to kind of rebuild things. And I think that the other school that I think is worth looking at for the true number two in terms of, do they have a culture? Do they actually have the players that are returning and the number of starts? It's Missouri. Missouri's offensive line, mostly returning, and they added some depth through the portal instead of adding some starters through the portal. So I think it could be really interesting to see if Missouri's offensive line takes that big step forward that would help the team become a playoff contender.
Yeah. I don't disagree with any of those. The only other team I might add in is the University of Texas, because they have 4 or 5 returning starters. And at least 2 of those guys are possibly All-Americans. So I would say maybe them. But I think Oregon, we've talked about it before on the podcast, Andy. Oregon is ready to come and transition into the Big Ten and fight. Like right away. They're not going to have to wait. You're not going to have to level up to get in position to go in the Big Ten and fight. They're ready to go right now. So I think that, and the Big Ten is going to be in for a rude awakening, thinking that all those Pac-12 teams are not tough and physical. Oregon is. So I think right away, or because they have a former SEC coach, out of Georgia. So Oregon right away is going to be ready. So I like that pick for offensive line. All right, man. We got one more position. We're going to take a break after that, and then we got one more subject. So the last position is DBU.
DBU I'm really interested in this, man.
DBU is talked about across the country. It goes back in the day when the 80s and the 90s where people were mad scrambling about who DBU was. I know at one point it was the University of Miami. I know at another point it was the University of Texas. I know there's been a bunch of no-fly zones all across the country, right? So I'm looking at who had what coming back because that's what we're basing our rankings on, right? How can you stop Denzel Burke, David Espinosa, Jordan Matthews, Sonny Styles, transfer Caleb Downs, the number one safety in the country, from freshman All-American, first team. Jordan Hancock. How can you stop that? Aaron Scott, freshman 5-star. If you don't know who I'm talking about, this is who I'm talking about. They have you're gonna have, listen, you're Lathan Ransom, Sonny Styles, and Caleb Downs as your safeties. That's not fair. That I don't care what you cut and how you cut it. That ain't fair. Denzel Burke, who was supposed to be in a starting corner, would have been a top round, first round draft pick at corner, coming back with Espinosa, with Matthews, with Aaron Scott. Come on, bro. It ain't even nothing to talk about. It's listen, there was a period in Columbus, Ohio. The Buckeyes was no-fly zone. Look, and you can say I'm biased. Look at how many first-round draft picks they had on the team. Marshawn Lattimore, Malik Hooker, Denzel Ward, Jeffrey Okua. I mean, I'll run down every dude they had. David Arnett. They had dogs, first-rounders. They haven't been this stockpile since they were at that time period. That 2015 to 16 runs, 2015-16 all the way to 2018-19, they had a run at DBU. The Buckeyes is, I'm back. I'm back because they have two legitimate All-Americans. Denzel Burke was an All-American. Caleb Downs was an All-American. They're back. Come on, bro. It's DBU is Buckeye Nation. Now, in all fairness, I got a strong number 2, and people ain't going to agree with me with this one, but the Colorado Buffaloes, bro. Man, you cannot have Deion Sanders' son, Travis Hunter, the 5-star McCullum, and then the 5-star they got this year coming back. They had no seniors in that defensive backfield, and that wasn't the issue and the problem in Colorado. That was not the issue and the problem. The issue and the problem was the linebackers in the defensive line. They're trying to fix it. So I'd be amiss to not say Colorado was number 2 without just based on it, because Travis Hunter can mess around and win the Heisman Trophy. He's really that good. So I got a strong Colorado at 2. But Andy, I want to see did you have anybody who I didn't have? Ohio State, Colorado. You have anybody I didn't have?
I was really high on Penn State before the portal opened and before announcements happened, and then they got some guys leaving and going. I thought that their secondary was going to be really good.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, I've kind of softened on that right now. I do think that the other one of the more interesting moves that I do think is going to happen is down in Texas. Like, that was a very good secondary that got cooked by Washington. They responded by going out and trying to add like some really good athletes to that secondary.
Yeah.
That's the only group that I would be slightly that I think you might have left off, but again, there's still a lot of unknowns, and again, we saw that secondary just get absolutely hosed. And it's weird. I think one of the things that's like been made very apparent here is that, we didn't talk about Georgia outside of the quarterback and the running back room. We didn't, we got Ohio State in here, we got Texas a lot, we got Oregon a lot. If you're going to go top 5 position units here, those schools I think would be top 5 in every single group that we talked about. And that's what we mean when we say that these are the 4 schools that are contenders to win the national title this year.
Mm-hmm. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got one more quick commercial break. We got a quick word from our partners. If you're listening on YouTube, we'll be back in like 10 seconds. Watching us on YouTube, we'll be back in like 10. For everybody listening to this audio, please just give us time to pay our bills from our sponsors and our partners. And we'll be back in 10 with the Level Up Podcast, Fans First Sports Network Podcast, Andy P. and Big G. We'll be back in 10. We're back in the building. Andy P. Big G, Level Up Sports college football podcast. It's never an off season. We get it in. We're having great conversation, great talk early and often. Because listen, the spring game tickets are for sale. So we got T-minus spring game, for a lot of programs, man. And there's a lot of excitement early this year because we got a 12-team playoff. So, Andy, saying all that, the format for the playoff this year done switched up. It's a little different. We know that the college football is going to be different like they've never seen before. We got 1 through 4, but we'll get into all how it's ranking. But, Andy, how is the format for the college football playoff going to shake it this year? And your thoughts early on with the college football,
Well, I think
playoff.
one of the things that people aren't talking, we actually, I should rephrase. People are talking about it, but I don't think we understand how big of a deal it's going to be that there are going to be home playoff games here. So instead of these games being neutral site games where previously you'd be relying on your fan base to travel out and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to go see your team play in insert warm weather expensive city, the first rounds of the playoff are going to be held on local campuses, which means that if you get seated the wrong way, you could end up having to take a road trip to a really hostile environment in January. And there are a lot of schools that we were talking about in this conversation where weather is going to come into major factor there. So say Penn State gets it together and gets to host a playoff game in Happy Valley in January.
Oh my God.
Like, great atmosphere. That's terrible weather. And that is something where I think in college, because of the way the seasons go, most of these teams are wrapping up their games in the north right around Thanksgiving before things get bad. And now we're talking about December, December games taking place in some really cold weather places. And I think for me, that is the one thing that is the true wild card in this whole process where I can go, look, we know what happens when good teams play good teams. We know which matchups matter. We know what to kind of look for. But this home field advantage is something that we've never seen before in a college football playoff scenario.
Absolutely. So I think we both agree on this. We both agree that when we start talking about the top 4 seeds, not in no order, but just we know who the top 4 seeds are going to be. We know that the SEC champion will be one of them. We know that the Big Ten champion will be one of them. We know probably that the ACC champion will be one of them. The 4th one is the wild card. I think that the playoff committee, based on strength of schedule, will either weigh the second-ranked Big Ten team or the second-ranked SEC team as the top 4. Agreed, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that's going to be really apparent here is that in the new reality where we have these 2 mega conferences and the ACC is expanded and teams are going to have very different looking schedules, you're going to, I think an undefeated conference champion, even though they might have a weaker resume than a 1-loss team, committee is still going to give an undefeated conference champion the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but then there's the interesting part. There's the segue. 5 through 12. We know that 12 is going to be the the highest ranked non-Power 5 conference school. So that's like those Tulanes, the Boise States, those teams like that traditionally have not been in a conference and might not. So it'll be somebody ranked like that at 12. But then 5 plays 12. 6 plays 11, 7 plays 10, and 8 plays 9. 5, 6, 7, and 8 all host a playoff game. So this is where that whole, what Andy's talking about comes into big time play. Because you could have, legitimately, okay, we're just going to say hypothetically, Buckeyes win the Big Ten, all right? Oregon finishes second in the Big Ten, but you got a better SEC team than them. Oregon's your number 5. Say Penn State messes around and beats Michigan, doesn't play Oregon, and loses to Ohio State. Penn State's probably going to be 6 or 7. So you got an Oregon and a Penn State that's hosting a playoff game literally the week before Christmas. in the North. And then now you know there's going to be some bias with it. So now you might have a Clemson come out of South Carolina and have to go to Happy Valley. Or even more so, you might have a Florida State having to go to a Penn State and play a playoff game in an atmosphere that will be electric because it's his first time. So I think for the first time, man, more than ever, the weather, the conditions, and how you played is going to set you up. And I don't think the college football fans really understand what's going to happen from an excitement standpoint. They're going to sell this thing like there ain't no tomorrow. But even more so, the hype of what you've always wanted to see with these big-time schools playing against each other in December after you ran the table and you see who's what. So I think for the first time, Andy, based on schedule, you might get some upsets that you won't expect to see. What are your thoughts about all that, Andy?
Yeah, 100%. I think what this format has done has made having a higher seed really matters for that opening round. And that's a good thing because then in the next round, you then go into, everything will get reseeded where the lowest remaining seeded team will play 1, 2 gets the next one, 3, 4, etc. But those will all be neutral sites and those will be the historic rebranded bowls, like your Citrus Bowls, your Cotton Bowls, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that by emphasizing home field, you're going to end up where it's going to be really hard to pull an upset, but a team that pulls the upset will be a very good team. So I think it buys in some protection for, this team had an injury midway through the year, and they get their core guy back later in the season. So like a Georgia, I think is a great example of that this year, where they they didn't lose a game during the regular season and they were still, fifth. They were sixth in the rankings.
Yeah.
That's a team where, they are going to probably win their game and we're going to see just how good they are. But I'm looking right now just at some of the way too early top 25s that we've got across the board here. And we could be looking at, Ole Miss, Missouri, Notre Dame, Florida State, Penn State, all mixing it up in some way, shape, or form. And those are all also great college football environments.
Yeah.
And that to me is, I think, what's going to be most exciting is to see, like, I love a bowl game. I love when you have the crowd split half and half. Like, I've been very lucky to go to a few big bowl games and see that, truly neutral half and half experience. It's really cool to go to or watch a college sporting event where the home field advantage is alive and well, and we've never seen that in a knockout game. Like, as much as I don't think that Lane Kiffin is legit, a home playoff game in the Grove, that's going to be really hard to win if you're a visiting team.
That's total facts. I mean, think about a guy like Dabo. If Dabo's listen, in the Valley, in Death Valley, they're running down that hill. Oh my God. Hey, Notre Dame will be electric. If they were able to host a playoff game in South Bend, Indiana, it would be electric for that opening week. So let alone like the big dogs, let alone like the Ohio State or the Michigan or the Texas or listen, those places are going to be booming anyway. But some of them other ones that's just like right just a tier below, unbelievable. All right, Andy. Great show. Great listening. Thank all you guys for walking with us over there in the live chat. We appreciate it this evening. Final thoughts, man, before we get out of here, Andy, for the Level Up College Football Podcast.
Now, I mean, I'm excited to see what news breaks this week because it seems like there's always something happening and there's always something moving in college football. But I think that as we get closer and closer to spring games, as we get closer and closer to spring ball happening, I'm really excited to see what's going on, and also just something to, keep your eye out on right now. Seeing it at some schools that are over their scholarship limits. Certain players are still hitting the portal right now. So you still have plenty of interesting names out there in order to fill out rosters that might not necessarily be as deep as you'd like it to be. So I'm sure that by next week we'll be talking about some of those names that have found new homes as rosters are finally starting to come into shape heading into spring ball.
And the bananas thing about that is, Andy, as soon as after they play the spring ball, the portal opens up again. So guys that don't get pegged at 1 or 2 in the starting positions and all whatever else, they're gonna hit the portal again. So it's this new wave of college football, man. I'm just so excited about, man. My final thoughts is this: be thankful and grateful if your college football team is a top tier team, because there's a lot of teams out there that's scrambling to figure out what to do in this new era of college football. So if you're like a Buckeye fan, a Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan, a University of Texas fan, a Florida State Seminole fan, Michigan fan, or a Penn State fan, Georgia fan, be thankful. Because even a team traditionally that's been a powerhouse, like the University of Alabama, is scrambling. They don't know what to do because of this new wave and new era of transfer portal. So I say all that to say, don't get content based on what your team's doing. Just be happy and thankful that you got a squad, that you got an opportunity to host a trophy at the end of the season, man. For sure, for sure. All right, man. Thanks again for listening to us on Fans First Sports Network. Make sure you swing on back every week for me, Andy P., listening and rocking out on the Level Up College Football Podcast. You can hear them all on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and or Apple Podcasts, or you can watch us live on the YouTube show as we get down with the college football talk and college football atmosphere. For my boy Andy P. and for me, Big G, we're out of here, and we'll check you guys next week. Holla.